Hello, this is a video that I have been planning since January. When I uploaded my favourite books of 2019 video, I asked you all if you would like to see my favourite books of all time, even though it would be really difficult for me, and you did. So ever since then I've been trying to figure out what my top 10 of all time is, and I think as of right now these are those books, but this is a very fluid list. I love a lot of books and it was really difficult to figure out what my line of loving a book was, but I think what it is if I finish a book and I instantly miss the characters and wish that there was more and wish that it wasn't over, even though everything's all tied up and I've got all of the answers I wanted. If all of those things are true, then it's a favourite book. If some of those things are true and not all of them are true, then it's probably a really great book and might still even be a 5-star book for me, but it won't necessarily make it onto this favourites list. So, with that in mind, these are 10 books or series, because I'm counting series in this, that are my favourite of all time, I guess. There are 10. One of them is a dystopian, one of them is a sci-fi, and the rest are all fantasy. But nobody's really surprised by that, are they? I'm gonna get on with it, much as it pains me to do so. To put this out there is difficult for me because I love so many books, but this is the list. This is in no particular order. I have them piled next to me as I found them on the shelves as I was pulling them out for this video, so no particular order. Let's get on with it. First up, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is the science fiction book that is on this list, and it's very much about relationships and characters, and I think that's why I like it so much. So we start off with Rosemary, who is travelling to a new job on a tunnelling ship, which is a vessel that creates wormholes in space, essentially, and we know straight away that she's made a fake identity and we don't really know why. And then we very quickly swap from her perspective to the perspective of Ashby, who is the tunnelling ship, the Wayfarer's captain. And from there we start to gradually meet all of the other crew members aboard the ship. It's written in a very episodic sort of style, so every chapter has its own sort of beginning, middle and end and moral of the story, as it were, and we're gradually discovering the existing relationships between the crew members and also them assimilating Rosemary into their family and becoming close friends with her too, and her finding her place in this found family. And it's really, really beautiful. It's really easy to read, and like I said before, when I got to the end of this, I just wanted to be back with the characters again, which means that it's very, very odd that I haven't read the rest of the series, although in my defence I've been scared to do that because the rest of the series, it's more companion stories rather than direct sequels. We don't actually follow the exact same characters in books 2 and 3, and I feel like I'll be sad to not be with all of the same characters again. But really, really love this one. It's fantastic. Then, of course, we have Harry Potter, which is largely on this list for nostalgia. Really, this has just been such an intrinsic part of my life since I was so very young. I couldn't tell you how many times I've reread this series. I couldn't tell you how many times I've watched and rewatched the films. I don't need to tell you what this is about. Everybody knows what this is about by now, and to give a synopsis of it would just feel a little bit strange at this point, but I think that this series will always have a place on this list purely because of that nostalgia and how important this series is to me and to so many other people, and the Harry Potter community as well is a really, really lovely thing to be a part of, and I really love that. So I think this will always keep its place here. The newest entry to this list is one that I only just read for the first time in December, so the fact that it's made it onto this list already is pretty impressive, but that is The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand, which is a Christmas Carol retelling that follows Holly, funnily enough, who is a Scrooge, and she's visited by the three ghosts who try to change her ways, but she doesn't change her ways, unlike Scrooge in the original story. And then when she meets her untimely end, she becomes part of Team Scrooge. She becomes one of the ghosts. I think she's the ghost of Christmas Past. Yes, she's the ghost of Christmas Past. And it was just such an amazing read for me. I found the writing style really easy to follow, and the character, although she's not the best person, she's not supposed to be, she's somehow still really likeable, and she does a lot of things that you think to yourself, why, Holly? Why would you do that? Don't do that. That's so silly. Please don't do that. And then she does it anyway. But you still root for her, and I just found it really wholesome and enjoyable. It's pretty light on the fantasy elements. It reads like a contemporary, but with those fantasy elements, which is another thing that I really enjoyed about it, because a lot of the time fantasy can be very heavy, and for that reason I think this is a really great entry-level fantasy for people, because it's slightly more than paranormal, but it's not quite as heavy as most fantasy is, and like I said, the writing style is much more contemporary based. There's a focus on romance. It's really, really sweet story, and I really enjoyed myself reading it. Can't wait to visit Holly again this Christmas and every Christmas hereafter. Another one that is deeply nostalgic is the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. So if I read this for the first time now, I don't think it would be on my top 10 list. Harry Potter probably would, because I still think it's really great and it ages really well, and as an adult reading it you can still appreciate it and enjoy it, especially the later books, whereas this is very much a young middle grade series about a girl who can see ghosts, and it's her job to help them move on to wherever it is they go next. So I don't know that necessarily I would love this if I read it for the first time now, but I read this so many times when I was in my sort of, when I was like 10, 11, I'm not even sure. I read it a lot of times, and you can probably tell by how beaten up and yellow and gross it is. I took this with me to the beach a few years in a row, and so it's all beachy, but I just absolutely love this series, and there's a romance in it as well. It is also fantasy. I think it's a pretty good sort of paranormal fantasy for young readers. I think it has aged reasonably well. I reread several of these books last year, and I do think it's still aged pretty well, so it's a safe one still to give to middle grade readers, I would say. And again, hugely nostalgic for me, but I still enjoyed them when I reread them last year. So definitely a favourite of mine. Next up we have The Dystopian, which is, of course, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Now, let me just mention that I hate this cover. I didn't realise I was getting this stupid choose your own cover when I ordered this from Amazon. It was meant to be just the usual card looking cover, but anyway, that's besides the point. What matters is what is behind the cover, which is a fantastic story that I've also reread many times. In fact, I've reread all of these multiple times, apart from Holly Chase, because I only read it for the first time in December, and I feel like you possibly can't read that one any other time of year. But The Hunger Games is a fantastic series. If you somehow don't know what this is about, it follows Katniss Everdeen, who lives in Panem, which is a post-apocalyptic world where humanity is reasserting itself, and the capital is the centre of humanity, and it is in charge. And when the districts that surround the capital rose up in rebellion and were eventually defeated by the capital imposed the Hunger Games as a way to remind the people of the districts that they're in charge and they can't be overthrown. And the Hunger Games involves 2 children from each of the 12 districts being selected once a year to go into the Hunger Games and battle to the death. And it is just as brutal as it sounds. This book is so high tension, high intensity, with great characters and believable relationships. Later on in the series we deal with mental health problems that are dealt with just so superbly, in my opinion. And this series originally came out 2008. This book originally came out, and I feel like the themes that it was dealing with were really quite novel for that time, but I absolutely love this series, and I feel like I will always love it and always want to reread it. Katniss is such a strong character. She's really, really flawed. She does a lot of things that you just think that's selfish or unwise or deeply self-destructive for no apparent reason, but you're still always right there with her, and you're always rooting for her and sympathising with her and wishing that things were different for her. This is a story that is uplifting and heartbreaking all at the same time, and if you haven't read this series yet, I really highly, highly recommend that you do, and I can't wait for the prequel to come out this year. Tales of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a President Snow origin story, which is a very interesting way to go. I think that's out in... is it out in April? Or did I make that up? Is it out in June? I don't know, but I'm excited. The next one I'm going to talk about is the Chronicles of Ixia, beginning with Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you've probably heard me talk about this series before. Although none of these are in any order, if I were to put them in order, this would be number 1, no question. Favourite series of all time. I absolutely love it. Yelena is an absolutely fantastic protagonist, and there aren't really words for me to describe how great I think this series is. We follow Yelena, who in the beginning of this book is in prison and she's awaiting execution, and she's led from the prison to her seeming death and then is offered an alternative. She can instead become the commander's poison taster, i.e. she has to test his food for poisons, which might lead to her death or it might not. And then we follow Yelena on this journey. It's an epic fantasy series, so I can't really tell you much more about it than that, which really only takes you to the end of chapter 1. But just Yelena is such a fantastic, fantastic protagonist. We deal with lots of really great mental health representation in here. There's lots of other kinds of representation later down the road as well. And there's a lot to do with identity in here and finding your strength and dealing with adversity, along with all sorts of politics and magic and that kind of thing as well, because epic fantasy, that's kind of what happens. And again, I feel like this one was ahead of its time in terms of themes. This one, oh, it just says this edition published in 2015, but it says copyright 2005. So I think this was originally released in 2005, not sure. But it's so fantastic. When did I discover this series? I discovered this series, I don't even know, maybe 2013, I think, and I've reread it I don't know how many times, quite a few times since I discovered it then, and I just absolutely love this series. Yelena is such a great character, Valek is such a great character, Janko and Ari are such great characters, and the plot lines are interesting, and everything that happens is interesting, and the themes that it deals with are powerful and important and really well handled. And I just want to shout from the rooftops about this series because I don't hear anybody talking about it, and more people should read it. It's great. Next up, I'm going to talk about a series that I actually don't have physical copies of, although I do want to get them at some point, and that is the Black Dagger Brotherhood by J.R. Ward, which is a paranormal fantasy romance series that follows the Black Dagger Brotherhood, who are sort of like the warrior race of vampires who are there to protect the rest of the vampires from this group of used to be humans called the Lesses. They're like sort of undead, not quite zombies, but it's difficult to explain what the Lesses are. They're the bad guys, and the brothers have to protect vampire society from them. But the main point of the series is we follow each of the brothers one at a time as they fall in love with people, and it's beautiful and pretty spicy, which I like, and it's just, I love the brothers, they're so great. Each of them is deeply flawed, okay? It's problematic. There's lots of problematic stuff in the series, but that's kind of the point. It's not problematic but not dealt with, it's problematic because they have shit to work through, and they do work through it eventually. Not always in the most healthy of ways, but that's kind of realistic in a way as well, I think. And it's also kind of wholesome in places. Not everywhere. Like I said, there are problematic elements, but in some places it's pretty wholesome, and it's a very enjoyable series. I love the brothers. I have a soft spot particularly for Sadist, who is the protagonist in book 3. Don't just skip to book 3 though, you have to kind of read books 1 and 2. And I'm behind on the series. There are like 17 books now and I've only read like 13 of them, so I do need to catch up. But really, really great series, and I just love the characters and I love being in the world. Every time I'm back in the world, I just feel comfortable, and yeah, it's an enjoyable series. And then we're going to finish out with the Brandon Sanderson, because of course you knew there was going to be Brandon Sanderson on this list. And first up we have the Stormlight Archive. So this is book 1, The Way of Kings. I've read all 3 of the current instalments in this series and super excited for Rhythm of War, which is coming out hopefully in November. I hope there aren't any delays with that because of what's going on in the world at the moment, because I need it. I need book 4. I need it now. This is an epic fantasy series. Can't really tell you too much about what it's about. There's lots of politics, there's a big bad, there's mysterious elements going on, there's magic coming up that nobody really knows too much about, there are characters to learn about. This one follows Kaladin, who is a slave, but he wasn't always a slave, and how did he become a slave, and what's his background story, and how did he get here, and why does he suffer with depression, what is it that's causing that. This series in general deals really well, I'm going to put this down because it's really heavy, deals really well with mental health. We have a variety of mental health conditions. There's also some physical disability representation in this one as well. There's quite a lot of diversity in terms of the characters, because we are on the planet Roshar and we kind of follow the whole planet of Roshar, really. There are interludes in between each of the 3 parts of the book that follow people in various places in Roshar, and we get their perspectives as well. So it's just a really intricate series, and I think it's the kind of series that you'll get to the end, go back, read the beginning and realise that you missed so much, because Brandon Sanderson is just absolutely fantastic at foreshadowing, and you will go back and kick yourself and be like, I should have realised, because he lays down the groundwork so early on. But this is just so well written. Although it's a big chunky series. It doesn't feel dense at all. It's very easy to read, and because you get so much time with each of the characters, you were able to deeply connect with each and every one of them, and I really love that because I am a character driven reader and there's still loads of plot going on in here. This particular entry is a little bit on the slower side because you're sort of grounding yourself in the world, but even then I didn't find pacing to be an issue. I just really feel so absorbed into the world when I'm reading these, and I just love the characters. And then finally, another Sanderson, we're talking the Mistborn series, specifically Era 1, because I'm not as much of a fan of Era 2, sad to say, but Era 1 I absolutely loved. This is a world where the magic is called allomancy and involves the consumption of and internal burning of metals to bring about certain powers, and a Mistborn is a person who can use all forms of magic, whereas a Mystic can only use one. And in here, well, in the first book, The Final Empire, we follow a gang of thieves, criminals, regular people who do bad stuff. Except this time they're banding together to overthrow their evil dictator, who's been ruling with an iron fist for 1,000 years. And the fight scenes in this series, oh my gosh, the characters in this series are fantastic. Vin, possibly my favourite character ever written, maybe apart from Yelena, who I talked about earlier, but I love Vin and I love all of the characters in this. Again, you get really connected to the characters in Brandon Sanderson's series because they just feel so real, or as real as anybody who can fly feels, you know? But just they just feel so human, even though they can do these really inhuman things. They feel really human and you feel their pain, and they've all been through awful things because they're part of the downtrodden portion of society and they're just trying to do their best, but you can see the pain that it causes them and the difficulty that they have, and it's just, again, just so intricate. And when you get to the end, you do, like I said before, you go back and you think, oh, how did I not see that coming? All the clues were there, but they were just so carefully hidden, like they were unimportant details that you don't realise the importance of them until you get to the end and think to yourself, gosh, I'm a fool, how did I not see that coming? Lots of people do see the main thing in this coming. I saw it coming like several pages before it came, but that's fine. It's okay. Again, just such a fantastic series. I miss the characters when I'm not in this world, same as with all of these books. I miss the characters, I miss the world, I always want to be there with them, and I love this series, I love all of these series and books, and that's my top 10. If you have a top 10, let me know. If you have a top 5, let me know, because that would be impressive. I definitely wouldn't be able to cut this down, it was difficult enough as it was. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.